London, autumn 1941. Fog, like a damp shroud, clung to the city, battered yet resilient. Searchlight beams swept futilely across the night sky, hunting for the ghosts of German bombers. I, Eric Sandgaard, sat in the outer room of an unremarkable building on Baker Street, waiting to be summoned. The peeling wallpaper and the smell of stale tobacco in the air merged strangely with the sight of the shattered city outside the window. My thoughts drifted back to the pre-war days. I was born in Bergen, Norway. My father was a Norwegian merchant, my mother a British teacher. My childhood was a cycle of the chilly sea winds of the fjords and the warm glow of the fireplace. I could map the cobblestone path from my house to the fish market with my eyes closed, and in my dreams, I could hear the bustle of London's Piccadilly Circus. This dual belonging once made me feel rich, now, it made me feel torn. In April 1940, when the Nazi iron heel crushed Norway's peace, and the radio broadcast King Haakon VII's voice refusing to surrender and vowing resistance, I was in London studying engineering at the university. A mix of rage, helplessness, and homesickness seized me. I immediately went to the recruitment point set up by the Norwegian government in exile. My language skills and engineering background kept me out of the regular forces, instead leading to an introduction to a more clandestine department, the Special Operations Executive. SOE training took place on the desolate Scottish Highlands. There was no London fog there, only biting wind and mud. We learned how to kill silently, how to create chaos with the simplest tools, how to pick locks, blow things up, send and receive coded messages. The instructor was a former colonial policeman with a scarred face. He often said, "Gentlemen, forget all the rules of gentlemanly warfare you've learned. Here, you will learn to survive like rats and strike like vipers." We practiced parachuting from high altitudes, landing in pitch-black fields. We learned to endure pain during interrogation, to keep secrets. That experience stripped away the last of my academic air, remolding me into a tool, a weapon to be dropped back into the darkness of my homeland. The door opened. Colonel Jackson's secretary gestured for me to enter. The colonel's office was hazy with smoke. A large map covered the entire table, marked with colored pins denoting enemy and friendly positions. His fingers, knuckles large and firm, pressed down on a distant point on the map, Norway, Telemark County, Vemork. Eric, the colonel's voice was low, carrying a hoarseness from chronic lack of sleep. We are about to assign to you, or rather, return to you, a mission. One that could perhaps tilt the entire balance of the war. He handed me a thin folder stamped top secret on the cover. I opened it. Inside were sketches of the Vemork plant, fragmentary intelligence on guard deployments, and a few blurry photos of Norwegian compatriots. My gaze fell on one photo, a young man with determined eyes and high cheekbones, named Klaus Heiberg, codename Swallow. His file indicated he was the area's finest skier and guide. The Vemork plant, the colonel continued, produces something called heavy water. According to reports from our top scientists, this is key to the Germans' attempts to build a bomb of unimaginable power. An atomic bomb. Atomic bomb? The word was both alien and terrifying to me, sounding like something from an H.G. Wells novel. Yes. Based on the theories of Einstein and others, a very small amount of certain substances contains immense energy inside. If released, simply put, if they succeed, a single bomb could wipe out all of London. The colonel paused, his gaze sharp, letting me digest this. And we believe the Germans are ahead of us, even ahead of the Americans. We must stop them. Vemork is the only place in Europe capable of large-scale heavy water production. Your mission is to return to Norway, make contact with the local resistance group Milorg, and then find a way to cripple, or utterly destroy, the heavy water production there. He walked to the window, looking out at London's broken skyline. This isn't simple sabotage, Eric. This is about the future of the civilized world. If we fail, we might face an ultimate weapon, wielded by the Nazis, powerful enough to dominate the globe. You will be the first line of defense against that. In that moment, I felt a weight on my shoulders far greater than any load carried in training. This was no longer about winning a battle, it was about preventing an ultimate terror from emerging. My homeland, Norway's mountains and fjords, had become the front line in this secret war deciding humanity's fate. March 1942, on a night of howling winds, I crouched in the bomb bay of a modified Halifax bomber, the airframe shuddering violently as we crossed the North Sea. Below was the dark outline of the Norwegian coast, occasionally dotted with the weak beams of German searchlights, like fireflies at the mouth of hell. The air inside smelled of fuel and cold metal. The jump light blinked on, a red glare stark in the darkness. The hatch opened. The freezing wind hit me like a physical blow, instantly stealing all warmth. "Good luck, mate." The pilot's voice came garbled through the intercom. I didn't hesitate, leaping into the night sky over this familiar, yet strange, homeland. For a brief moment of free fall, there was only the roar of the wind. The jolt of the parachute opening yanked me upward sharply, then the world fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hiss of the rigging lines in the wind. I struggled with the lines, trying to avoid the shadowy shapes of lakes and dense forest below. Finally, I landed hard on a snow-covered hillside, icy snow filling my collar. I quickly cut the parachute lines and, with fingers numb from cold, buried the parachute and jumpsuit in deep snow. According to plan, I needed to rendezvous with Swallow, Klaus, at a nearby abandoned hunter's cabin. I lay low in the extreme cold for 2 days, surviving on hardtack biscuits and hot tea from a thermos. Nights were spent wrapped in a thick sheepskin blanket, barely sleeping in temperatures of -20 degrees Celsius. Every rustle and sound put me on edge, fearing German patrols. On the evening of the third day, just as I began to doubt the rendezvous, a figure ghosted across the snowfield, appearing soundlessly behind me. The muzzle of a rifle pressed gently against my back. "Don't move," a low voice said in Norwegian. I froze. "Eric Sandgaard," he continued. "Yes. You are Swallow?" He moved in front of me, lowering the rifle. He was leaner than in his photo, his face etched by mountains and harsh weather, his eyes as blue as the fjord waters. He wore an old Norwegian army snow camouflage suit, skis propped beside him. "Klaus Heiberg." He nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile appearing. "Welcome home. Though home has changed." He handed me a piece of tough reindeer jerky. "The Germans are everywhere like lice, but we have our ways. Eat. We need to reach the next safe point before dawn." Led by Klaus, we began a grueling ski trek. He was like a spirit of the snow, knowing the land intimately. He could judge weather changes by wind direction and snowflake patterns, spot potential danger from animal tracks. We crossed frozen rivers glowing faintly blue in the moonlight, scaled steep ridges that seemed to reach the stars. At night, we huddled together for warmth in snow caves, listening to the blizzard roar outside, sharing our meager food and more precious stories. Along the way, Klaus told me about Vemork's specifics. The factory was built on a precipitous cliff edge, the only land access a heavily guarded suspension bridge over a 300-meter deep gorge churning with icy water. The plant area housed large numbers of elite German mountain troops, bristling with machine gun nests, searchlights, and alarms. "A direct assault is impossible," Klaus panted, his exhaled breath frosting his beard. "We need to slip in like shadows. Behind the factory is an almost vertical cliff. The Germans consider it a natural barrier, so the guards are relatively light. That's our way." After days of near-exhausting travel, we finally reached the resistance camp, hidden deep in the mountain forests within a large rock crevice. It was home to dozens of Norwegian patriots, hunters like Klaus, young students, silent workers, even a former Norwegian army engineer, Knut Lier. He was the soul of the place. Lier gripped my hand firmly, his palm rough and strong. "We've been waiting for you, for an opportunity." His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with a steady flame. We knew they were producing something unusual there. The transport security was abnormally high. But not until we received the intelligence from London did we understand its true weight. This isn't about blowing up a factory, Eric. This is about preventing a catastrophe. We must act, at any cost. At the camp, we joined up with another British commando team that had parachuted in via different routes, forming a 9-man action group. Operation Codename, Gunnerside. The plan was simple, bold, nearly insane: completely avoid the bridge, scale the seemingly unclimbable, ice-covered cliff at the rear, infiltrate the factory's core, plant explosives, and return the same way. We conducted repeated sand table exercises and simulated training. Knut Lyer, using his engineering expertise, detailed the factory's structure, pointing out the most critical and vulnerable parts: the heavy water concentration plant and the high electrolysis cell room. The plastic explosives we brought were shaped into long strips for attaching to pipes and tanks. Time delay fuses were set for 30 minutes, giving us time to withdraw. The night of February 27, 1943. The weather was unexpectedly cooperative. A fierce blizzard swept through the Telemark region. This was both our ally and our enemy. The bitter wind and heavy, low-visibility snow drove German sentries back into their posts, but also drastically increased the difficulty and danger of the climb. Dressed in white camouflage suits, faces smeared with antifreeze grease and charcoal, we moved like ghosts through the storm towards the cliff behind Vemork. The snow was knee-deep, every step a struggle. Near the cliff edge, the wind grew stronger, threatening to sweep us away. Facing the near-vertical, ice-sheathed smooth rock face, we secured ropes with grapnels. The sound of the grapnels catching hold was lost in the wind. I was in the middle of the line. Wrapping my gloved hands around the rope, I began the silent ascent. My fingers quickly grew numb, losing all sensation, forcing me to rely on arm and leg strength. Ice crystals on the rock face cut my cheeks, the blood freezing instantly. Below was the black abyss, like the maw of a beast ready to devour everything. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, almost louder than the wind's shriek over the rocks. Time seemed to freeze. Every second was a test of will and physical endurance. After what felt like an eternity, just as my arms felt they would tear, my fingers finally touched the clifftop's edge, piled with soft snow. I cautiously raised my head. The factory's huge, partially snow-covered silhouette loomed before us, like a slumbering steel beast. Searchlight beams, diffused by the dense snowflakes, swept weakly across the empty grounds. We had made it. All 9 of us reached the cliff top safely, undetected. Following the memorized factory floor plan, we quickly split into 2 groups. My group's target was clear: the heavy water concentration plant. Klaus and Lyer knew it inside out. They led us, moving like shadows along the building's edges, avoiding the occasional patrol. Inside, the low hum of machinery filled the air, along with a faint, peculiar chemical smell. Using special tools brought from London, we silently opened an inconspicuous side door to the plant. Inside were huge, metallic cylindrical concentration tanks and a web of pipes, emitting a low thrum, like the beating heart of a giant. This was the apparatus producing heavy water, the core of the Nazi atomic dream. The cold seemed somewhat dispelled by the industrial heat radiating here. We moved fast. 2 men on watch, the rest fixing the high explosives like plasters onto key points on the concentration tanks and pipe junctions. Each explosive placement was precisely calculated to ensure maximum, irreparable damage. My hand brushed against the cold metal. I could feel the liquid flowing inside. Thinking of the destruction this thing could bring, my hands moved faster, more determined. Setting the time delay fuses, we swiftly withdrew from the plant and returned to the cliff edge. Just as we grabbed the ropes and began our descent, the first muffled thud of an explosion came from within the factory, like a suppressed cough. Then a second, a third. A chain reaction of explosions began. Flames shot skyward, instantly staining the falling snow and the entire gorge red. The sounds of shattering glass, tearing metal, German soldiers' shouts, and sporadic gunfire erupted from the plant. Sirens wailed piercingly through the snowy night silence. But we were already down the cliff, ropes sliding rapidly through our hands, bodies bumping against the rock face. Once at the base, we immediately cut the ropes and vanished into the vast storm and the dark forest. Looking back at the sky, reddened by flames and boiling with thick smoke, I knew we had succeeded. This precise strike would set the Germans back by months, buying precious time for the Allies. Exhaustion and cold were now replaced by a huge, near-prostrate excitement. Operation Gunnerside was a brilliant success. Heavy water production was halted for months. Over 500 kilograms of heavy water leaked out in the explosions, key equipment destroyed. Hitler was furious, ordering enhanced security for all vital industrial facilities. Vemork's garrison was doubled, the cliff topped with barbed wire and alarms. Yet, the German desire for an atomic bomb wasn't extinguished. They brought in their best engineers from Germany, working day and night to repair the equipment. By late 1943, intelligence from our contacts within the Norwegian civilian population indicated that Vemork, through immense effort, was nearing the restoration of partial heavy water production. The Allied High Command, particularly an anxious Churchill, decided to give the Germans no further chances. He was convinced they must drive the nail home. On November 16, 1943, the U.S. Army Air Force dispatched a large fleet of B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, conducting a fierce carpet bombing raid on the Vemork plant. The bombing caused severe damage, with large areas of the factory collapsing, but it also brought tragic collateral damage. Many Norwegian civilians in the nearby town of Rjukan were killed. When we heard the news over the secret radio, the mood in the camp was heavy. Klaus punched the wooden table, silent. Lyer's eyes welled with tears, for his dead countrymen and for the cruel necessity of war. We understood it was necessary to weaken the enemy's war potential, but a heaviness, like a Norwegian winter cloud, settled over everyone. After the air raid, the Germans finally realized Vemork was no longer safe. They made a final decision, to transfer all remaining heavy water, key equipment, and some core technical personnel back to Germany, to continue research in a more secure location. This news spread through our intelligence network like wildfire to London. A new, unequivocal command came down: the heavy water shipment must not reach Germany. This was the last chance, the final chapter of Gunnerside. By now, I was more deeply integrated into the Norwegian resistance network, more a local than an outsider. We quickly ascertained that the precious heavy water, several hundred kilograms, would be loaded into special steel drums, transported by rail to the dock at Lake Tinsjo, then ferried across the wide lake by the rail ferry Hydro, before transferring to trains bound for Germany at the hub on the opposite shore. This time, no British airborne commandos were needed. Our local resistance fighters were sufficient for this final blow. The on-site commander was Knut Haukelid, a calm, meticulous engineer and a veteran of the Gunnerside operation. The plan was to place timed explosives on the Hydro S hull, sinking it in the deepest part of the lake, ensuring the heavy water was unrecoverable. On the night of February 19, 1944, Haukelid and two companions, disguised as railway workers and carrying bombs disguised as luggage, infiltrated the dock area where the Hydro was moored. The bombs were carefully designed with waterproof pressure-sensitive fuses, their calculated explosive power sufficient to rip a large hole in the hull but not cause an immediate detonation of the cargo, allowing the ship time to reach deep water. I, along with Klaus and others, lay hidden in the dense spruce forest on the hillsides overlooking the lake, watching the dark dock and the ferry's vague outline through binoculars. The cold was piercing, we were nearly frozen stiff, but intensely focused. I watched Haukelid and his two men, carrying their luggage, calmly pass the sparse dock guards, board the ferry, and disappear into the ship's entrance. Every minute felt like a century. My heartbeat sounded loud in the silent forest. Finally, right on schedule, the three men walked calmly back down and vanished into the deepest darkness before dawn. I knew the bomb was in place. It lay like a silent assassin in the Hydro S hull, awaiting its final judgment. February 20, 1944, 10 a.m. sharp. The Hydro sounded its horn and pulled slowly away from the dock, heading for the middle of the lake. The weather was clear, the lake's surface covered with thin ice shimmering faintly in the weak winter sun. My heart was in my throat, the binocular lenses fogged from my tense breath. About 45 minutes later, as the ferry reached the deepest part of Lake Tinzhou, a low, dull thud, as if from deep underwater, reached us. Through the binoculars, I saw the Hydro-S hull shudder violently, its bow beginning to rise at an unnatural angle. Thick smoke and steam burst from the ship's midsection, it listed rapidly. The crew panicked, scrambling like ants, jumping into the freezing lake water. Rescue efforts began immediately, but survival time in near-freezing water was extremely limited. Within minutes, the ferry, carrying the last hopes of the Nazi nuclear program with its precious cargo of several hundred kilograms of heavy water, along with some German guards and technical documents that sank with it, plunged into the eternal darkness of the lake bottom, hundreds of meters deep. The Germans attempted salvage, but the lake's depth and cold made it technically extremely difficult. They only recovered some insignificant wreckage and a few survivors. Their atomic bomb project, along with the Hydro, was entombed in the icy lake, utterly destroyed. Standing on the hillside, watching the lake gradually calm, leaving only an oil slick and some floating debris, a complex mix of sorrow, relief, and victory washed over me. We had succeeded. At minimal direct cost, we had delivered the most fatal, final blow to the German nuclear program. Those heavy water drums sinking into the depths symbolized the definitive end of Hitler's atomic ambitions. Klaus, beside me, let out a long, silent sigh and patted my shoulder. We didn't cheer, just stood quietly, for this necessary destruction, and for this hard-won victory. The sinking of the Hydro proved to be the final straw for the German uranium project. Thereafter, Germany's atomic bomb research essentially stalled, resources diverted to other vengeance weapons like the V-2 rocket. They were no longer a substantive threat. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a behemoth named the Manhattan Project was advancing at an unprecedented scale and speed. I learned snippets through the secret radio. America had gathered the world's top minds, Oppenheimer, Fermi, Bohr, many of whom were exiles fleeing Nazi persecution, investing over $2 billion in hundreds of thousands of people. They built city-sized complexes in the New Mexico desert, at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, pursuing both the uranium-235 gaseous diffusion and plutonium-239 reactor production paths simultaneously. Unburdened by heavy water shortages, possessing almost limitless industrial and economic might, their progress was rapid. When I heard over the clandestine radio on August 6, 1945, that the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay had dropped a uranium bomb codenamed Little Boy on Hiroshima, Japan, my feelings were profoundly mixed. It was the horrific weapon I had helped prevent, ultimately unleashed upon the world in another form. The radio's description of that light brighter than 1,000 suns and the utter destruction that followed sent a chill through me, a deep moral vertigo. 3 days later, Nagasaki was hit by the plutonium bomb Fat Man. Japan soon announced unconditional surrender. The war was over. I often ponder in the quiet of the night, if we had failed in Norway, if Gunnerside had failed, if that heavy water had reached Germany, what would the world be like? Perhaps, in 1944 or 1945, a mushroom cloud bearing the swastika would have risen over London, Moscow, or even New York. The war's outcome might have been completely rewritten. The sustained Allied sabotage of German heavy water facilities, from the precise surgery of Gunnerside, to the powerful blow of the U.S. air raids, to the fatal strike of sinking the Hydro, undoubtedly bought the Manhattan Project the most precious time and utterly eliminated the competitive threat from across the Atlantic. In a sense, we, the nameless ones fighting in Norway's snowfields, cliffs, and shadows, personally snuffed out Hitler's atomic dream, inadvertently paving the way for America's success, and indirectly determining the target and location of the atomic bomb's first use. After the war, I returned to London, but a part of my soul remained forever in Norway's mountains and lakes. I couldn't tell anyone the details of my experiences. My name wouldn't appear in any history books, my deeds were sealed deep in the SOE's top-secret archives, likely not to be declassified for decades. Such is the spy's fate. We are soldiers without names, swords in the shadows, guardians destined to be forgotten. Colonel Jackson told me upon my discharge, "Remember, Eric, history is written by gunfire and speeches, but its course is often changed by actions in the silence." But I know, behind history's grand narrative, at that pivotal point deciding humanity's fate, I and my Norwegian companions, Klaus, Lier, Hakulid, and those resistance fighters whose names I never knew, played a crucial role. Our silent actions ultimately transformed into thunder echoing across the world, altering the war's course and reshaping the post-war world. Whenever night falls deep and quiet, I can almost hear again the wind on the Norwegian snowfields, feel the sting in my fingertips while climbing the cliff, see the flames lighting up Vemork, and the deep, unfathomable dark waters of Lake Tinsjo, which swallowed the heavy water and its ambition. That was a silent battlefield. No medals, no paeans. But we were there. We fought to prevent a darker, more terrifying future. And we won.